Well, welcome to Founder Stories. Today we have Gentry Underwood from Mailbox.
Hi.
Welcome, Gentry.
Thanks for having me. Hi.
So we first met a little over 2 years ago, and just realized it was a month after you started Orchestra. And I remember grabbing a coffee with you and Scott, and you guys were just thinking through forming your company. Share with us a little bit about your initial vision with Orchestra, and how did you get that going? Because I know that it was tough at the beginning.
Sure. I imagine for most startups, it's tough at the beginning. I was at IDEO. I've been there for about 4.5 years, and my co-founder Scott had been at Apple for somewhere between 5 and 6. We were both kind of in roles where we were designing collaborative software for the organizations we were in, and we were actually hanging out with a group of friends that was getting beers once a week, and just talking about life and talking about tech. And Scott and I started over and over again talking about the different tips and tricks we were using to build internal collaborative software that resonated with people. Historically, enterprise software has been this thing where you force it upon users, but we were both in a position where we were trying to build tools for our organizations that were opt-in, and that created a whole new set of challenges about how you voluntarily build adoption and create tools that help people that they actually want to use and get them to use it even though they may have a different workflow. And while we were talking about all the different tips and tricks that were working, we realized we both really liked this class of problem and thought it would be fun to try our hand at leaving and starting a company and trying to basically do something in the same kind of collaborative productivity space.
And in those first kind of 6 months as you and Scott were forming the team, what were some of the surprises that you had as a new founder CEO?
I think one of the most surprising and hardest things for us was just realizing how consuming a startup is. We both had come from companies that were intense, but there's so many pieces that are done sort of invisibly behind the scenes. And when you start a company, suddenly you're worrying about everything from the product to raising money to building a team to figuring out where your space is to be to finding a good lawyer, et cetera, et cetera. And it swallows you whole in a way that I don't think anyone can be prepared for. It's a little bit like having a kid. You stand on the outside and you see it happen and you think you know what you're getting into, but it's not really until you're fully underwater that you realize kind of how big a problem it is that you've actually tried to bite off.
Yeah, I can relate. I know one of the things I've found as a first-time founder CEO is how lonely and hard it is. And you don't read a lot of articles about that. What were some of the things that you did to try to help address that?
I think far and away the best thing you can do to help with loneliness is have a co-founder that you trust deeply and that you can share that trial with. There are a lot of times that you're going to do things that don't make sense to anybody else, and to be able to have alignment with that person and have a constant back and forth and kind of have a reality check at least between two people, and then to share the burden of kind of walking it alone the rest of the way it makes all the difference in the world.
Now I remember about 8 or 9 months after we first met in the summer, I thought that you might be a great addition to Twitter. It connected you to Jack. Tell us a little about that experience. Especially in your mind of, wow, maybe this isn't going to work. Maybe we need to exit the company now.
Yeah, so we formed Orchestra in November of 2010 and had this vision of a shared to-do list, basically. The aha that had gotten Scott and me to actually take the leap and go after a startup was realizing that across the board, people were collaborating with one another through email, and they were using it as this kind of terrible to-do list. And we thought, wow, there's an opportunity to build something that feels like a to-do list, but is collaborative in the way that email or SMS or chat is. And we had taken that idea and run with it, raised some seed money, put together a small team, and built a prototype that became kind of we didn't call it 1.0, a kind of pre-1.0 release in the App Store, which had received a lot of attention. People were really excited about it, and felt like we were getting early traction, but we were in that spot where we were trying to raise a Series A and didn't know what was going to happen. And we got to a place where our seed money was really low. In fact, I think by the time we eventually closed our Series A, we had something like 3 days worth of money left in the bank. And yeah, so we were talking about maybe joining up with Twitter at that time as one of the options we were exploring. And so it was a really interesting time because you know, you're on the one hand trying to see if you can raise more money to keep going. You know, you haven't gotten there yet. For me personally, I really wanted to build a product that got traction, just to have the experience of building something that took off, and to have that experience of kind of your sail catching wind and the ship being carried. But it wasn't clear we were going to get there, and we were running out of time, and that took us to
and you just in the nick of time closed your A.
Yeah, I think what happened was we launched the product, and there was a sort of groundswell of interest at the right time that caused us to be in a place where we had more than one VC interested at once. And I think that's one of those things that makes all the difference in the world. Kind of go back to some of the sheep arguments before. When it rains, it pours, and suddenly everybody wanted to try and do a deal, and then everything overnight changed, and we had another long runway.
So certainly one of the tests of your leadership was when you had 3 days left of cash to pay salaries. And talk to me, or talk to the group a little bit about what level of transparency did you provide to the employees, and how did you lead the company through that?
Honestly, the internal leadership of our organization, I think the credit for that belongs to my co-founder, to Scott. He's just a natural. It's a tough line. You know, you need to bring people along in terms of enough transparency that they feel a part of the process and they understand what's going on. Obviously, you're to a certain extent taking people's personal lives in your hands and asking them to trust you. At the same time, part of your job as a founder is effectively to be like the front end of a ship and deflect as many of the waves as possible to create as steady a state as you can through something that's inherently very turbulent. It's a tension that we have to constantly hold. I don't think we showed anyone our bank accounts, but we did. As we got more serious about talking to Twitter, we brought folks into that discussion, and as we began talking to VC firms about raising a Series A, we brought people into that. It's something where we're careful about how much. It's sort of like we try not to share more information that is necessary to help keep people in that place where they know what's going on, but they're not burdened with a bunch of unnecessary information that's just going to distract them. I mean, the flip side is every moment counts, and through everything that you're doing in a startup, you're trying to maximize the use of the runway that you have, and the more you can keep people from being distracted, particularly emotionally, I think the more the team can work together to build something great.
Yeah, finding that right level of buffering is so critical.
Yeah, I think it's a dance.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to convince people to follow you up the hill to go take that mountain if you're not expressing conviction that you can, regardless of inside how much you're potentially questioning that ability.
It's a really good point. I feel like there's a big difference between how much transparency you bring in the sort of day-to-day turbulence versus how much you share and build camaraderie around the why of what you're doing. Like getting to the core of the problem you're trying to solve, and building a culture around a passion for solving that problem. That's invaluable, and I think to create as much transparency and as much shared vision around the space you're going to go out and try and make a dent in, that's I think helpful without a caveat.
Yeah, I think that why question is something I ask oftentimes now that I'm on the venture side of, like, why are you doing this? And so it makes a lot of sense to use that as kind of your rallying cry around your team. So you close the Series A, you've got this vision around solving this to-do kind of mail problem, but the first app was more of a to-do app. And so talk to us a little bit about that application, what you saw from that, and then what that led into the product that became Mailbox.
Sure. You know, Mailbox and Orchestra are really, Mailbox is really version 2 of Orchestra. It looks from the outside like a pivot, but really it didn't come about that way. As I said, we set out to basically wedge our way into the productivity space based on this realization that everybody was using email as a terrible to-do list. And the first angle of attack that we had on that problem was building a mobile-oriented to-do list that was collaborative. And that was, at the time that we started out to do it, a very novel idea. And it felt like a really great opportunity. There was no to-do list on the iPhone. This was before reminders. There was certainly no shared to-do list at that point, although things like Flow came out along the way while we were building the product. But as we, even among the people that really got excited about Orchestra once it was out, we saw that there was a fairly steep drop-off in usage. And we went back to try and understand why. And we came to believe that to-do lists themselves are a sort of product with a diminishing return. You use them, and at first they're like this blank slate. And so it's really exciting. You go in and you put all your stuff, and you get your life organized, and it feels great. But no one ever finishes everything on their to-do list. And so over time, you've got this nagging sense of responsibility kind of wagging its finger back at you. And we were trying to figure out how to solve that, and we ended up in this place with basically this snooze system where you could basically put things off, and they would come back in at a certain time. And we were working on this, and it felt really good, and we were getting to this place where every day a to-do list could feel like a blank sheet of paper as opposed to something with a nagging list. But we were still watching our users and realizing that even our most hardcore users, and certainly all of us on the new, magical, euphoric to-do list, we were all still stuck with this problem of too many things in our inbox. And the basic issue is that while I might make a pact with my spouse or my teammates to use some other tool, the rest of the world is still going to be sending me emails. And unless we all collectively made the decision to abandon email, email was here to stay. So there was this moment of realizing we had made a really bad assumption early on in our approach. And we backed all the way up and realized maybe instead of building a to-do list that has the functionality of email, we should just transform the email client where all of those tasks already lived and try and build a tool that gave people more control and a different sort of experience with their mail.
Mm-hmm. Now, we've talked a lot about building products and kind of the design kind of centered approach that you and your team have taken. How do you, with that center of gravity being in design, talk to us a little bit about how design and engineering work within your company, and how do you get that virtuous cycle working well? Especially as you're making doing these explorations and making these changes.
Yeah, you know, for us, design is this. I think often when people hear the word design, they think of something that's about making a product pretty or giving it a bit of panache. Mm-hmm. And for us, well, I'm trained in the sort of human-centered design or design thinking school that David Kelly and IDEO and the D School has made so famous. And there, the term design really applies to a way of approaching problems. It's a process that one submits to where you go from a vague understanding of a problem to a very detailed understanding of a problem that's represented in a series of principles for how the problem could be made better. And you lock onto those things. And from that series of principles, you may prototype lots and lots of different solutions, but you never let go of the kind of why of what you're trying to solve. And so the rest of the design process is really one of trying to iterate quickly to minimize the cost of failure and to make sure you can fail as often as possible before it costs too much. So there's a saying at IDEO that you fail early and often to succeed faster. You prototype and brainstorm and try lots of ideas and keep them lightweight and iterate like crazy. Pay a lot of attention to what's working and what's not. Don't be afraid to question your assumptions and kill your darlings, and you just iterate forward. And when design is framed that way, I think it's useful across the stack. So it's just as important for us that we approach problems of interface or aesthetics or brand with that iterative process as it is that we approach engineering. Mm-hmm. So engineering in some ways is actually better suited for this because an engineer knows full well that if you're iterating on a solution and you come up with a different problem, that's not success. I mean, engineering for the most part is the problem gets very well defined before the solution is attempted, and then there's a similar kind of iteration to find it. I think it's something that we tried to bake deeply into our culture. There are values that get attached to this sort of approach, like being highly collaborative, constructive in criticism, spending a lot of time saying, how might we make this work, as opposed to a lot of time saying this will never work, and generally being optimistic. Mm-hmm. So we tried to bake those values into the culture from the deepest level. And in that sense, I think it's a ubiquitous approach.
So if I understand correctly, the human-centered kind of design approach that you employed included both engineers and designers as you were doing that iteration.
You know, it even included investors. I mean, one of the things for us that was, I think, a little unusual was when we put together a pitch deck about where we were with Orchestra. We explained the product and the vision and why we were going after the space. But as we moved to the area where it's common to say have a hockey stick of growth projected and talk about the size of the market, we just put a big question mark. And we said, you know, we don't actually know where we're going to get from here. We're very committed to this way of solving the problem that we're going to be applying, but we can't promise you where it's going to lead. And that was sort of a two-directional test, if you will. Like some VCs looked at that and kind of turned their head sideways, and that sort of stopped the conversation. And others, I think, found it refreshing, because the reality is most companies in the stage that we're in really know very little about how they're going to actually solve the problem they're going after, I think.
So that development process on the product side makes a great deal of sense. It's something similar to what we employed at WebOS, actually, to do the iterations pretty quickly to get that out. But there's also an infrastructure component to your product. And so how do you balance the stability and performance pieces on that back end to iterating rapidly on the front end?
Well, I think there's a lot of iterating that happens on the back end, too. You just have to be careful about how you do it. So we knew in the space of email in particular that a fail whale, is really not an option. And we had to create a system that...
Fail is not an option today either.
But it was a common feature, and I think it's a common feature of a lot of early startups. An MVP in the space of email, though, it has this massive burden on it that people... We actually discovered this early on. We had early tests of Mailbox, and we got our friends on it, people that knew we had literally been killing ourselves trying to get this thing out. And if email went down for a few minutes, they were so angry with us. It was a very hard thing to experience. And that helped us realize that we needed to kind of like juggle this. We needed to stay agile in our ability to improve this architecture on the back end and iterate very quickly on what was working and what wasn't, while trying to put in place systems that would maximize the chance of us being able to stay up at all times. It's actually where the reservation system ended up coming from. And a lot of queuing systems within the architecture that some brilliant parts of our engineering team spent a lot of time building ahead of time have allowed us to improve pieces of the system without the rest of it falling over. And if something does break, it's as if the rest of the system sort of sits by and waits until it can be repaired or replaced, and then it picks right back up where it left off. So we create this kind of zero-fail architecture that still allows us to iterate quite a bit on the components.
On the back end. So now that you're a part of Dropbox, is your vision still intact in terms of the product that you want to go build with Mailbox? Or, and if so, how do you and Drew kind of reconcile priorities across the larger company?
That's a great question. You know, it was really fun to launch this thing and to watch the world get excited about it. I mean, to go back to this the conversation we had a second ago about like letting the sail fill up. There was that moment of, you know, you've been rigging this thing 1,000 different ways, and you hoist it up, and all of a sudden the ship just starts flying, and you're holding on for dear life. It was an interesting time for us, because in that moment we realized we could go raise more money, and there were opportunities to do that felt like really great opportunities for us, but we had basically found ourselves in a massive market. And you know, if a startup's this short-term business that exists to find a gap in the market and try and fill it, we realized the gap we had found was really big. And what became very important was to try and find a way to fill it quickly. What was really exciting about the opportunity to go to Dropbox was it felt a bit like working with a venture firm, except with one that has incredible experience, particularly in engineering, and a really world-class engineering team, and a lot of other great teams around support and customer service and all the rest that we could become a part of and leverage as a way to basically go after this market more quickly. And so the hope was that we could basically continue Mailbox inside the context of Dropbox, to basically attach ourselves to this larger organization and continue on that path. And what we found since we've been there is that that's exactly what we get to do. It's really exciting. I remember the first week and a half after being at the company, Scott and I, in typical design form, we gathered all the different suggestions from all over. All these people were very excited about Mailbox being a part of Dropbox, and we collected all sorts of great ideas about how the two could fit together and things that we could be focusing on. And we literally filled this foam core board with sticky notes and mock-ups of various features and integrations and different things we could be working on. And we pulled together the co-founders and the head of engineering and grabbed a conference room and said, okay, we've been here for almost 2 weeks, and we've heard all of these great ideas for things that could be used to better integrate these two products, but we can't do it all. Like, what's most important? And Drew and Arash just kind of like stared at us, and Drew said, well, what are you asking me for? What's best for the user? And it was this moment of unexpectedly rediscovering the right way to go about building this sort of thing. And that's very much core to how Dropbox approaches this.
That's fantastic. Coming back to your reservation system, which was pretty novel, talk to us a little bit about, did you have to talk to Apple about doing that? And do you anticipate other applications kind of leveraging that kind of novel approach that you took to mitigate the load on your service?
Yeah, we found ourselves in a bit of an odd place with Mailbox, because here's this mobile-only experience. There's no web app that you can go to. And so when you download Mailbox, and in an app store, an app is basically on or not. So when you download Mailbox, if it's not ready to be used, you have this, what feels like a tool that you brought onto your device. It's not like a website that you go to. It's this thing that you brought into your world that effectively doesn't work. If you've got to make people wait, and I think sometimes with services, it's very common. Gmail took a very, very long time to roll out, for example. We can think of probably half a dozen, Pinterest, Spotify. In the case of an app or a mobile-first experience, you've got this shift in people's expectations. They don't expect to download something and not be able to use it. So for us, that was this point of consternation. How are we going to create an experience where we can carefully protect the servers while scaling to make sure we don't fall over, without creating this horrible experience of an app that just simply doesn't work? And we didn't know how long it would take to put people on. We realized the only piece of information we had is how many people were waiting. And that led us to this place that felt a little bizarre at the time, but we figured it was the best we could do, of just giving people their place in line like a deli might. And Josh Ellman, to his credit, suggested while we were working on this that maybe we would also put the number of people that were behind you in line, because everyone likes at least looking back over their shoulder and seeing that they're not the only schmuck waiting. And yeah, that was kind of the whole of it. I think in one of those ironic ways, it became kind of a big piece of our launch. And it's something that people have talked about and other apps have begun to replicate. I expect that ideas from it will continue forward. Some apps will probably copy it very directly, and others will make some version of it. But in general, we are in this weird place where when you bring an app that's really a service onto your phone, you have to curate that onboarding in a way that really hasn't been done before.
Yeah, it's the first time we've seen that. Kind of switching gears, backstage I asked you what you were doing yesterday, and you were recruiting, which, not surprising, you probably spend at least 50% or more of your time recruiting. But recruiting for a company that's, we'll say, sub 15 people, which is what Mailbox was, to now today recruiting for Dropbox. How does that change, especially as you look at designers and engineers that are coming on?
I think the good news is it just means the scope of the problem is bigger. Dropbox is a very special company in a very special stage where the sky's the limit in terms of the impact that it can have. And we're trying to put together a team that's really up to that challenge of rethinking a whole suite of experiences. For me, that's really exciting, because I'm so energized by working with the world's best and brightest people. And I think one of the things that the Dropbox team has done very well has been fastidious about only bringing on people that are so talented that they can be trusted to do whatever they were hired to do without a lot of overhead and management. And that is an approach to leading a company has created this space where you're surrounded by remarkably talented people. And so for me, recruiting is really fun, because it's about trying to identify really brilliant folks who might be able to be added to that mix. And then it's a gift for me, because I get to work with them every day if they join.
Fantastic. Well, Gentry, thanks for coming on today, and thank you to all of you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's great.